talks about you, then you are nobody. Then you are nobody. Remember.
All is one reflection. So, we are here tonight to honor our newest and powerful ancestor, Assata Shakur. She became an ancestor at approximately 1:15 today. And these metaphysical autopsies that I have been doing have been typically around um, current events and untimely passings of individuals. And this is an untimely passing. However, I'm going to deviate from the style that I've been practicing recently, and I'm not going to do a reading because I believe that we need to yet let this young ancestor um, be at full power as she transitions into the land of the ancestors. And I just don't feel that it is most respectful to do a reading into her life in the way that I typically would do with bones or etc. So right now, what I'm going to do is look at her life. Um, I'm going to look at her life as um, the ancestor that she was, and or the ancestor that she has become. Y'all, I'm sorry, I have some noise in the background. Give me just a moment. All right, I'm sorry, y'all. Teenagers. Okay. So, as I was saying, what we're going to do tonight is look at the astrology of the Queen's birth. We're going to talk a little bit about her life and what that looked like, the impact that she had. We're going to also look at the astrology of today as she became an ancestor, and then we're going to wrap a bow on it and just give thanks and praise that we were able to be alive at the same time that she was. Okay, that sound good, everybody? And thank you so much for being with me here tonight. So, as I said before, today was the day that Assata Shakur became an ancestor. The report that I'm going to do tonight offers a metaphysical analysis of her life, her escape from prison, her exile, and ultimately her rejoining the ancestors. We examine the energetic patterns that surround her transformation from political prisoner to um, her becoming a spiritual icon. We use astrology, metaphysical law, African cosmology, and ancestral insight as we uncover how her journey was governed by spiritual forces that protected her, shaped her path, and now claim her as an honored ancestor. This is not intended to retell her biography. You guys can all read up on that on your own, and prayerfully you have prior to now, but you definitely will be motivated to do so now. But it is more so a reading of her spiritual imprint, who she was, and who she will be to us now that she is an ancestor, and all of the unseen architecture that created what we will now experience as echoes of her energy. So we know her as Assata Shakur, but she was born Deborah Byron, and she adopted the name Assata, which means she who struggles. And the name, her middle name was Olugbala, which is the Yoruba name for savior. And these names express her revolutionary identity. Okay. She was born on July 16th, 1947, in Flushing, Queens, New York. She was raised between Queens and Wilmington, North Carolina. So she spent time in the South with her family, which was typical, particularly in that time, because a lot of people were migrating from the Deep South up north, following jobs and, better economic security. And so she lived between both places during the 1950s and 60s. She attended um, the Borough of Manhattan Community College and later the City College of New York. She became involved in civil rights and Black studies movements. In 1967, she was married and she divorced in 1970. So the turning point in Assata Shakur's life happened in 1973. There was a shootout on the turnpike. On May 2nd, 1973, Assata was involved in a police stop um, along the side of the New Jersey Turnpike. And this shootout involved troopers, and one trooper in particular died, as did one person in her entourage. Okay. So I do not know the exact details of the stop, whether it was warranted, legal, or any of those things. But basically, she was in the car with some of her associates. They were pulled over and a shootout happened. A cop was killed, and so was one of the people that she was in the car with. Now, she was later charged with the murder of that police officer. But here's the thing, she had a wound in her arm, and it was determined that her hands were up at the time she was shot. So, how could she have shot the cop? But nevertheless, she was charged. Um, and I'm going to be referring to my notes, y'all. So, her defense contended that her hands were up at the time that she was shot, arguing that it was impossible and very unlikely that she could have fired a weapon. Nevertheless, she was charged and convicted. Okay, she was convicted of murder and a bunch of other felonious charges. So during 1973 and 1977, she was in court fighting these charges. She was actually in prison for 6 years. Okay. Um, she was in prison for a total of 6 years. And I guess the active period of her going to trial and fighting was 73 to 77. She was tried on multiple charges, including bank robbery, kidnapping, attempted murder, etc. She was acquitted on some of the charges, but ultimately she was convicted of the murder of Trooper Forrester. So, if her hands were up, it's unlikely that she pulled the gun that ended his life. In 1979, Assata Shakur escaped from Clinton Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. The escape was meticulously planned and executed by members of the Black Liberation Army. Armed individuals entered the prison posing as visitors. They took two correctional officers as hostages at gunpoint and facilitated Assata's escape in a prison transportation van. And the officers who had been taken as hostages were freed unharmed without incident. Okay. She disappeared from public view when this happened and lived underground for several years. And then in 1984, she resurfaced in Cuba, where she had been granted political asylum by Fidel Castro's government. The United States government repeatedly demanded extradition. And in 2013, she became the first woman placed on the FBI's most wanted list. So that is a little bit about her life. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this section, at least talking about her accomplishments in life. We know that she's an author. We know that she's a speaker. We know that she was a film artist, and did a lot of things in her life, contributed to um, a lot of thought concerning liberation, anti-establishment, etc. Okay, and hopefully you are familiar with that, or at least motivated enough by this broadcast to go and do your research. But what I want to talk about is how she became who she became to us, and who she will be to us now that she has transitioned. So she became an ancestor today, September 25th, 2025, in Havana, Cuba. And it has been reported by her daughter that she passed of health complications associated with advanced age. I do not know exactly what that means. Okay. Um, Her daughter, um, Kakuya Shakur, posted that the approximate time of her death was 1:15 today, local Havana time. And so we give thanks and praise, that we were able to enjoy her, that we were able to live during a time that she lived, and that we will have the opportunity to enjoy and experience echoes of her energy. While she may be a polarizing figure to some, to others, she's absolutely iconic. And I'm going to say her name again, Assata Shakur. Um, in African American radical and liberation movements, she is, as I said, an icon. She's a person who represents cultural memory, and she is and was a major contributor to Black studies. Her autobiography, Assata, an autobiography, remains widely read and cited by movements concerned with incarceration, resistance, and state violence. Her life invoked narratives of resistance, exile, and the tension between state power and Black self determination. And that's very important because she rose to relevancy during a time where a lot of Blacks, a lot of so called Black people, okay, and civil rights movements were interested in assimilation. They were interested in sitting at certain counters and eating in certain restaurants. And for that, in exchange for getting to sit at these counters in these restaurants and eat that bland ass potato salad and all that other nonsense that they were serving from behind those counters, we abandoned our restaurants, causing them to go out of business. We stopped shopping at our stores. We stopped visiting the businesses in our neighborhoods. We exchanged that for a seat at the table. And now we look up and we own nothing anywhere. Okay. So Asada was a product of that environment. Okay. And she stood in opposition to some of those nonviolent assimilation tactics. And self determination is a big part of what we will understand to be her legacy. Let's talk a little bit about the astrology of her birth. She was born July 16th, 1947. And I do not know the exact time of her birth. So, for that reason, I'm not able to go as deep as I would into the astrology, but I really wanted to do that today in honor of our new ancestor. And I also wanted this to be timely. So, I wasn't able to do as much research as I may have been able to, you know, had I had more time. So, I don't have the exact time. So, please do not hold that against me. I'm doing my best. Okay. So she was born with a sun in Cancer. Okay. Cancer is a sign of nurturing, it's a sign of protection, home, lineage, and emotional memory. Okay. We know that cancers can carry with them a lot of emotion. But the thing that's important to understand is that that emotion often comes from memory. And not just the memory, the physical memory of the individual, but ancestral memory. We know from science and we know from Ifa that the residual memory and experience and understanding and wisdom of our ancestors can inform us for 16 generations, while we are able to influence generations that come after us for 16 generations, right? So sometimes that emotionality that we experience from cancers is actual ancestral emotionality, right? A response to things that have been experienced, to things that were forecasted and understood even before they happened. For Assata, the fact that she was born with the sun sign of Cancer suggests that she was born with deep currents of ancestral care, vulnerability, but also defense. So those 16 generations show up and they show, yes, these are the things that we've been impacted by. These are vulnerabilities that we may have. These are things that we saw. These are wounds that we came here this time to heal. But we also are here to defend and protect those things that we anticipate in the lifetime of our beloved, whoever that is in this case, Assata Shakur. So the Cancer sun sign carries inner sanctuary that must be defended. And yet it must also become a source of empowerment. So we see that people who are born under this sign as it relates to ancestors, okay? So this reading might be different were she not an ancestor, but because we're talking about um, Assata as an ancestor, what we understand is that in this life, she was going to seek sanctuary. It was necessary for her to seek sanctuary this lifetime so that she could prepare for becoming an ancestor. And that in doing so, she would become empowered and propelled. So, this lifetime for her was one of working through things, of healing previous traumas in her own life and those who had come before her, and preparing to step into power, to unfold in new ways that are more powerful as she transitions through cycles of life. Her life showed that she could not be contained inside of conventional expectations of gender, race, or political safety. Okay, so she came here to raise hell. She came here to bust free of things that had encased her in previous lifetimes, to things that had jailed and subdued those who had come before her. So we're going to talk about her moon rising and other indicators, okay? Um, so without knowing the exact time and leaning into some information that I was able to acquire, it looks like she may have had Libra as her ascendant, and she may have also had a Cancer moon, okay? So, if her moon was in fact in Cancer, then this would mean that she would have had emotional depth and maternal empathy. Again, reaching back to um, the ancestors and having that ancestral thread be very prominent in the ways that we would experience her. She would also have psychic receptivity. That's what the moon does, right? And this also sometimes speaks to a tendency to internalize pain or to be protective of one's inner circle. We see this in the way that she came to be arrested, right? If what the police say is true, and we don't believe that, but they say that the she shot a police officer, then that would have been in defense of someone that was close to her or someone that was important to her. So just that little bit kind of forecast the situation that we found her in when she was ultimately arrested. Okay. A Libra rising would also grant the outer personality a kind of balance and diplomacy and concern for fairness and attention of mediation, right? So she's going to be looking for balance. She would have always taken issue and had a problem with imbalance, injustice, things that are unfair, shit that don't make sense, right? That would have just irked her soul. Combined with a deep Cancerian feeling, um, she would be able to easily move between care for those that she saw as downtrodden or the underdogs, struggle, meaning that she would be willing and poised to fight, to make corrections, and she would be a seeker of justice. Okay, so this is written in the stars. This is what her sign and her placements and the stardust that she was made of anticipated about her life. Mercury in Cancer is tied to emotional memory, rhetorical strength, and the capacity to speak from the heart and from hearth and lineage, right? So, a Mercury in Cancer made it possible for her to have that emotional memory that I spoke about in the beginning that came through with her sun in Cancer, right? So, Mercury in Cancer means that she's going to be tied to that emotional memory, and it's going to give her the ability to deal with rhetoric. It's going to give her the ability to sort through the sages, right? Who has spoken on subjects like what we are experiencing right now? What did they say? What did they think? What did they do? Perhaps we can look at what they did and do better. This is how she was built. This is how she thought. And this is why she was able to say, no, this doesn't work. We will not allow this. We will not abide this injustice, right? That's all coming from, again, that stardust that she was created from. So the Mercury in Cancer gave her the capacity to speak on matters, to not just notice them and not just maybe write about them or think about them or allow them to make her more emotional, but it also gave her the confidence to speak about what she understood, about what was happening and what had happened before. Her Venus in Cancer speaks to deep attachments to people, to home, to roots. And it speaks about a particular kind of loyalty and perhaps even difficulty in letting go. This might explain why she continued to fight even as she was free, right? She didn't just escape and go to Cuba and get married and have some kids and start a new life and lay low. She kept up the good fight. She kept writing and talking, determined to make changes, right? Difficulty in letting go that was attached to her having a Venus in Cancer. So a Mars in Gemini speaks to her having quick intellect, strategic movement, and being very adaptable, particularly in debates and disagreements. So, this may speak to why she was able to speak so fervently against things that were happening in the US, things that she had experienced and things that continued long after she left. Jupiter in Scorpio, which is transformational faith. It talks about courage in darkness and uncovering hidden truths. Okay. And then a Saturn in Leo, which talks about boundaries around self expression, challenges in being seen, and lessons about power and dignity. So, altogether, what we are hearing here is about a person who was deeply connected to the suffering of others, who guarded with her whole heart those people that she cared about and people who were connected to the same causes that she was, people that she loved, that she was concerned with, and she was willing to do what she needed to do, which landed her in prison. Even after, and see that loyalty must have been reciprocal because she was broken out of prison, you guys. So the people that she loved her. She was broken out of prison, and even after she made her escape, she continued the fight. She continued to talk. She continued to write. She continued to be present. She didn't abandon her cause and she didn't seek freedom and peace. She wanted to be a part of change. What a powerful ancestor we have gained, y'all. So let's talk about the destiny that was forecast by her astrology a little bit more. Having a Cancer sun and other emotional planets suggest that her life would have revolved around protecting the vulnerable, housing memory, and transforming trauma. So these are things, this is part of her mission, who she came here to be, part of her purpose. We often talk about purpose. Those of you who have received ancestral life path readings from me, those of you who are part of my program, you know, your life's purpose is one of the biggest things that we have to ponder, one of the biggest things that we have to consider. One of the largest goals that we work on is uncovering our purpose and working on our purpose, because the 16 principles of Ifa tells us that we all have a purpose and that we came here not only to complete our purpose, but to help other people in completing theirs, right? So she would have been very focused on her purpose, and protecting the vulnerable is part of what her purpose was, making sure that no one was abused on her watch, that no one was hurt on her watch. Okay. She would have been a keeper of ancestral memory, and she would have been intent on transforming trauma. You know, not just saying, oh, baby, I'm sorry that you're hurt, but I'm sorry that you're hurt. Get up. Let's go. Walk with me. Let's fix this. Okay. Not just passing out band aids. That's what she came here to do. The presence of darker probing planets in Scorpio and Jupiter forecast a path that would not shy from danger. She wasn't no punk, y'all. Death or moral reckoning. She wasn't afraid. She said, if they put a bullet in my back, they will put a bullet in my back as I am racing towards freedom. Okay. She was not afraid. And then a Saturn in Leo indicates that she would face trials around leadership, ego, and standing in the limelight, being honored, or even being silenced, right? So that Leo is really not comfortable with anybody forcing any situation. That Leo is not going to take kindly to being silenced, and that Leo is not going to take kindly to being pushed into the limelight. She needed to do things on her own terms, and she did. She needed to do things in her own way, and she did. So, how does her astrology speak to who she would become? Well, that's what we've been doing, but let's continue it rather. Okay. So, the watery and protective core of Cancer made her responsive to marginalized lives and ancestral grief. And I've touched on that before, but I'm just going to talk about it a little bit more. She was very connected to the suffering that had happened before this lifetime. her own suffering, perhaps from previous lifetimes, and the suffering of her ancestors. She was very much connected to that. Much of what she was going to do, right? She could have made different choices that led her to different places. But whatever she was going to do in this lifetime was going to be connected to righting the wrongs that befell her ancestors. That is what is written in the stars, okay? And processing ancestral grief, healing the ancestors. Y'all know one of my favorite things to talk about is the interdimensional way that we all live. We live in the eternal now, no matter what. But we are able to be informed by, protected by, and propelled forward by ancestral energy. And as that happens and is coupled with the decisions that we make in the eternal now, we are preparing a place for those who are coming after us. So the future. So Assata Shakur would have been very much aware of that. Her cancer placements made that was written on the backside of her forehead, right? So she understood that. And she would not have been afraid to do whatever she needed to do to heal those ancestral wounds. She would have been the one to heal ancestral grief in her bloodline this lifetime. That would have been her intention, her purpose. Okay. Her emotional architecture would demand that personal healing and social justice intertwine. The blending of emotional planets with strategic transformational ones like Scorpio influences and Mars in Gemini offered her both heart intelligence and tactical acumen, a rare alchemical combination. So let me say that again because I want y'all to understand this. So, with Scorpio influences and Mars in Gemini, she would have had heart intelligence, meaning she would have been very emotionally intelligent, but she would have also had tactical acumen, meaning that she would have been able to trust her intuition. She would have been able to walk fearlessly into a myriad of situations, but she would have also been nimble enough to do that in a mundane level, to not get caught. And if she did get caught, because she was accused of a bank robbery too, right? She didn't get arrested for that. So she would have been able to make all of these moves to right the wrongs that she perceived and to not get caught. And if she did get caught, she would be able to get out of that trouble, which she did, ultimately escaping and living in Cuba until she became an ancestor on this day. Okay. Her chart suggests that she would experience a life of gradual ease, but also one of crucible, very defining moments, right? Confrontation, exile, and eventually mythic bearing. So it's forecast in her chart that she would become someone who's talked about after her lifetime, that she would be one that is revered, that is spoken about, you know. Um, I think that's very interesting because here we are. So let's talk about the date of her passing. So we know how we got here. It was written in the stars. She was not going to abide any suffering this lifetime. If she saw people suffering, she wasn't going to be able to take it, right? She wasn't going to sit by while people are mistreated. She was going to fight, and she was most likely going to get away with those fights. So, the astrology of her passing on today, September 25th, 2025. Um, let's talk about what the cosmic currents are that are active on today. And what does this tell us about her transition and how that connects to her legacy? Okay. So, again, you guys, there are certain things that I'm not able to speak on because I don't have exact times. I don't know even exactly what time she died. I have read that it was around 1:15 local time in Havana, and I ran my report based on that. But don't come for me if it's not exact, because I'm doing my best and I just wanted to get this to you all as quickly as possible. I know how important ancestors are in our shared practice. And so, for those of you who are praying for a swift and gentle return of Assata Shakur to her ancestors, I wanted you to have as much information as possible so that you could edify her life and echoes of her energy. Okay. So today the sun is in Libra. The scale of justice is activated. This has to do very much with legacy, mediation, and honor. Okay. We are in a Mercury retrograde. This speaks of communication disruptions, possible message delays, or a need for reevaluation of certain narratives. So, what that tells me is there may be some, as we hear about her death being covered in mainstream media, we may not always like what we hear, right? It may not always resonate with us, it may not always feel nice. There may need to be a retelling of or reevaluation of the narratives that are being put out. You know, um, that doesn't surprise me. Saturn in Pluto configurations have to do with transitions, endings, and structural closures. Okay, so today is a day that is ripe for transition. It's a day that is ripe for endings and structural closures. Now, what I don't like about that is that structural closures may not be so great for where we are situated right now, because I do believe that with the passing of Assata Shakur and others, it is the end of an era. Y'all, who are the leaders amongst us right now? Who are the leaders of the African American community? Who are the freedom fighters of today? Who are they? And so, as these elders become ancestors, I think it's leaving gaping holes in our communities. It's leaving gaping holes in our marching orders. You know, we don't exactly know what we are doing and what is happening next. So today is ripe for the ending of an era, for structural closures, for things to change forever, right? So there are several node activations today, and they speak about karma, ancestral reconnection, and public memory shifts. So what that means is, as I said earlier, we may need to reevaluate narratives that are told, but this also means that today and the days following, we have the opportunity to shift public memory. We have the opportunity to tell the narrative that we want to be remembered. The truth, absolutely, but not, oh, she was a criminal who escaped to Cuba. No, she was a freedom fighter, wrongly accused, who fought against injustices, right? We can tell those stories. You guys love to post. You need to post that, okay? Passing on a justice ruled day suggests that she transitioned under scales of cosmic judgment. Her work will forever be weighed in public and spiritual courts. Her work will always be considered. That's very powerful. I think that's something that we can each pray for, that our work will always be considered, that the contributions that we make when we are walking amongst the living and when we are involved in society, that those things will constantly be considered, be talked about for generations to come. The retrograde atmosphere may delay how her life is told or understood, but it also invites a deeper review and correction of misinformation. So, yes, we're in retrograde, and people may misunderstand. People may say, oh, wasn't she on the FBI most wanted list? Yeah, but here's why. Again, we have a job, if we care, to make sure that those stories are told accurately and entirely. The cosmic pressures of ending cycles, and this is coming through Saturn and Pluto, align with the closing of her earthly chapter. But it also sows seeds for renewal, her legacy and rebirth in collective consciousness. Okay? So basically, the fact that she became an ancestor today means that her passing, it may be discussed with some difficulty, meaning that the full truth may not always be told, and that understanding of who she was may not be easily had by those who have not been previously exposed. But it also means that there's a huge window for the correction of those difficulties. It also means that her contributions are going to continue to ripple through reality and be talked about and be weighed. Well, this person said this, but Assata Shakur said this, right? Those Libra scales are going to make sure that she's always part. She's going to be part of ongoing conversations about liberation. And I think that that is all that any of us could hope for. So today was a great day for her to become an ancestor in that regard. There are several metaphysical laws that I want to talk about with regard to her passing. The first one is the law of correspondence. And if y'all listen to enough of these reports, you're going to learn these laws. That is my hope and my prayer for you. So the law of correspondence says that as above, so below. Assata's struggle in the material realm mirrored cosmic justice and ancestral balance. These are things that she carried into this lifetime with her. Okay. Her body of work was a reflection of these spiritual currents. Her legal battles, her exile, and her ancestral memory were the earthly counterpart of cosmic tensions that were foretold and when she chose to enter this human experience. The law of cause and effect, also known as karma. Every act, every rebellion, every state of repression that she encountered is a part of a chain of causation. Her escape, her exile, and later criticism of state power all feed back into that law. What she sowed was what was sown against her and will continue feeding into systematic justice and retribution. Okay. So she basically, so this is actually saying two things as I am now trying to understand it. Chickens coming home to roost, right? If you back an animal into a corner, it's going to come out fighting. Why would a divine expression of the Most High God be any different, right? You back her and her ancestors for generations and generations, and her neighbors and her friends and her family and the entire country of Black and brown people into a corner, and they're going to come out fighting. She was just one person who was brave enough and heard her call loud enough and decided to answer it. And now that she has, that energy is going to reverberate through reality and on and on and on. And hopefully it will influence others to not give up on the fight for justice, um, and liberation. The law of vibration. She operated in a very high spiritual frequency, even when she was beset by oppression, even when she was behind bars. Now, I don't know the part that she played in planning her escape. I do not believe for 1 second that she didn't know anything about it, but I don't know the part that she played. But even behind bars, even at a low point, right? Even being exiled from everything that she ever knew and loved, she was still a freedom fighter. She still made moves. Her voice, her writings, her presence resonated beyond the material realm. Even after death, her vibration will continue to ripple outward. Ashe. That's my prayer. That's my prayer for our ancestor. The law of rhythm is the next law, metaphysical law. Her life was marked by turning points, radical shifts, imprisonment, escape, and finally asylum. These are cyclic dynamics. Her death is a culmination of cycles, closing one, opening another for her work and her legacy. It's almost as if she was a gatekeeper, right? Taking that ancestral memory and bringing it into this lifetime and using it as a catalyst for her to become a leader and a change maker, transmuting imprisonment to a breathtaking kind of freedom, but still continuing to fight. And even as she was free in Cuba, it was almost as if she was in prison, because had she left Cuba and gone any other place or been caught in transit, she may have been imprisoned again, right? So, cycles and contradictions. And finally, the law of mentalism. As above, similar to the law of rhythm. I'm saying as above because I'm reading my notes, y'all. Sorry. Um, the law of mentalism, all is mind. Okay. Her activism, identity shifts, and exile all arose from an internal gravitational field. How she conceived freedom, pain, and resistance. Even her posthumous memory is governed by what collective consciousness chooses to carry forward or suppress, right? So the law of mentalism has everything to do with this sister's life, because it was those things that she remembered, those things that carried her in her mind, that fueled her to do the work that she did. And it is the way that we carry her in our mind that will inform how her legacy shapes the work that we do now and the work that will be done even after we are gone. So we must say her name. We must add her to community altars, and we must be grateful that we had the awesome blessing to be alive at the same time that she was. And her work spanned generations. So there's a Bible verse. Y'all know I'm going to read some Bible. You know I'm going to do that. Okay. And so I'm going to read Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. I'm reading from the New King James Version. And the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. I think that is a very fitting scripture for our good sister tonight. Her life echoes this passage, and it fits within the biblical framework of prophetic resistance. Another verse I'll share with you is Proverbs 31, chapter verses 8 and 9. Proverbs 31, I'm sorry. Proverbs chapter 31, verse 8 and 9. Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the case of the poor and the needy. She spoke when many were silenced. She challenged what was assumed. She carried the burdens of many. Let us say Ashe. Let us give thanks. So there are several Orisha correspondences, things that I would like to consider. I would like for you to consider as we consider the life of our new ancestor, Assata Shakur. Let's think about Eshu, right? What Eshu energy is all about and what Eshu does. Eshu, the messenger, the path opener. Assata's life was deeply about communication and boundary crossing, challenges to authority, and guardianship. Eshu's energy is oftentimes found in the voice of disruption, the messenger between realms. And remember, I said in the beginning, due to her placements, she was going to carry that ancestral heart forward, that ancestral emotionality, right? So she was in the flesh in this lifetime, but very much connected to what had come before her, standing at the threshold. Okay, so Eshu was all over her life. Um, and in her escapes, also, Eshu is obviously prevalent. Um, Prevalent in the legal defiance, the stance that she had to take as her cases were being tried, and the communication that needed to necessarily take place between her and those in government and those who were attempting to put her away forever and ever, right? So Eshu is definitely present in her life, um, representing, I feel like, triumph more than difficulty. We also see Ogun, the warrior, the protector, the path clearer. In her militant affiliation, the Black Liberation Army, and confrontations with the state, Ogun's energy has been manifest. She was shot, but she did not succumb to her injuries, right? And it was, in fact, that bullet that would have or should have cleared her from what she was accused of. Her entire life was spiritual warfare, not only against material structures, but also in defense of ancestors, memory, and memory of atrocities, and Black dignity. Ogun protects those in struggle and clears the path where oppression blocks the way. Oshun, the river, because her life was deeply connected to memory, narratives and wounds, and maternal lineage. Oshun's subtle currents were at work throughout her lifetime, right? So that emotionality that was spoken about earlier, the ancestral memory, all of those things to me read as Oshun involvement in her life, right? And I'm not doing a reading on the sisters, so I can't say with any certainty, but we all have Orisha walking with us. And I'm just saying what I see, okay? And then finally, we have Shango, Rhythm. We spoke about rhythm earlier, right? To a degree, her presence speaks with thunder, right? Righteous anger, challenges to authority, and demands for clarity. In the mystic structure of her life, Shango's energy um, was likely accompanying her at many points, and there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't accompany her into the afterlife, vindicating her public memory and stirring storms of justice. So even as an ancestor, we pray that this Orisha energy that was with her in her lifetime, that the echoes of that will be available for us to tap in. So what else do I want to go over? Do y'all have any questions at this point? I would be happy to answer any questions or read any comments that you may have. I do have a few other things that I could talk about. If y'all have any questions, just drop them in the chat or any comments. So I'm just going to wrap a bow on this section because I do want to talk about something kind of interesting, okay, for all my Orisha folks, because we know that she moved to Cuba and we know that in Cuba, they practice derivatives of Ifa. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. But just to wrap a bow on it, her birth chart foretold a life of deep emotional engagement, memory, and struggle, a soul that was wired to embody ancestral grief, resistance, and tension between care and conflict, right? She would want to care for the people, but she would also want to raise hell about what's happening to them. Okay, so a little bit of a struggle there. Her passing date, um, under the scales of justice and structural ending energies, signals that her work now formally joins spiritual judgment. Her narrative will be contested, it will be weighed, but it will also be canonized, right? So people are going to talk about who she was and what she did, and they may judge that. That's going to be that retrograde energy doing its, that funky thing that it does. But ultimately, she will be canonized. Ultimately, people will remember who she was and what she did, and her contributions are absolutely undeniable. Metaphysical law shows that her life was always um, spiritual warfare, and that karmic recalibration and vibrational offerings are going to follow her into the next lifetime, should she have one. Perhaps she will join the Egungun and be elevated. We don't know. But echoes of her energy will remain. And my prayer is that we are able to tap in and do what we need to do to be invigorated and empowered in our own expansion and becoming. The Orisha correspondences that I highlighted earlier show how her cosmic patterns intersect with African spiritual forces. Her journey moves in the domain of gatekeepers, warriors, and ancestral memory. In death, Assata Shakur transitions beyond human controversy. I'm sorry, let me read that again. In death, Assata Shakur transitions beyond human controversy. Her spirit now becomes part of the ancestral chorus of those who labored for Black freedom. Her voice, her memory, and her lessons after the spiritual afterlife are not weakened, they are more potent, challenging every generation to carry forward her burden. So I want to talk about her exile as an initiation. Okay. You are welcome. I'm reading the comments. You're welcome. Okay. Assata Shakur's escape from Clinton Correctional Facility and her subsequent exile to Cuba are spiritual transformations. They constitute a form of initiation into invisibility, into living legend, and into ancestral archetype. Okay. In African cosmology, exile is the means by which a soul steps outside of the structure of domination, entering a liminal zone between the physical and the spiritual worlds. In Yoruba and other traditions, like Congo, for example, those who disappear from the known world often re-emerge as spirits, ancestors, and divine messengers. Ashe, may it be so. Assata didn't just escape prison, she actually crossed a metaphysical threshold from being a woman of flesh into being a woman of legend. This echoes the experiences of Orisha like Eshu, who stands at the crossroads where known and unknown paths diverge. Um, this echoes experiences of Ogun, who resides in the forest, foraging new ways forward when civilization collapses, and even Dambala, the snake, who leaves behind his old skin as he becomes renewed through isolation. Okay, so these are just some examples of how Yoruba um, and other African cosmology weighs in on people who sometimes have to leave to become even more present. You understand? The years between Asada's escape, which are 1979, and her resurfacing in Cuba, 1984, were marked by silence, secrecy, and invisibility. In metaphysical terms, this was a journey into the underworld, a descent into the invisible realms. She became like an Orisha who lived beneath the earth, or one who lived between realms. She, and there's some references to Gede, who walked between the earth, the earthly realm, and the spiritual realm. She also entered the realm of underground knowledge, right? Which is why I said she's like an Orisha who lived underground, a force of nature, which is an Orisha, right? Who lived underground, meaning outside of immediate perception, right? She's going to go into history. You're going to have to read to know her, right? She's not someone who is going to be widely talked about, even in spiritual groups, which is why it was so important for me to do this broadcast today, because I said, I know that the conversations that will be had about her may be few. And I at least wanted my voice on record saying, we remember her, we appreciate her, right? A lot of her contributions are going to be underground. The knowledge will be underground. You'll have to read about it. And you know what they say about if you want to hide something from Black folks, right? Put it between the pages of a book. That's so sad but true, but maybe they'll watch this video. Okay. So the fact that she found refuge in Cuba is very interesting. Cuba is actually very consecrated territory in the African diaspora. It is a land of Orisha. Palo, and Espiritismo. These are all derivatives of Ifa and other African spiritual systems. So, African cosmology was alive and well in the place that she made her escape to. So, being sheltered there is actually a return to ancestral traditions. And we know that she came into this lifetime bearing heavy ancestral wounds and being very emotionally connected to the ancestors. So the fact that she went to Cuba was probably very healing to her soul. The spiritual systems that she may have encountered in Cuba would have aligned very much with ancestral traditions. She would have experienced a sanctuary of spirit. Cuba being one of the few places where being Black and revolutionary is not criminal. Okay, beautiful. Um, and she was protected. So the Orisha of that land, right? The gods and goddesses, little g's, of that land protected her. The forces of nature of that land welcomed her, shielded her, and allowed her to continue to unfold and continue to become and continue to contribute. So, what I want to say is that Assata Shakur's death marks the closing of a cycle, but not the end of her influence. Her life now enters the spiritual register as both warning and wisdom. It's both a map and medicine. Tonight, I have intended to trace how she moved through systems of power without being broken, how her story carries codes for those who are still navigating resistance, silence, and survival. Assata has become part of our shared ancestral chorus. Her voice continues, not just in protest, but in presence. So I thank you guys for joining me tonight. This was my humble attempt at giving thanks, honor, and praise to the ancestor, Assata Shakur. We're so grateful for her contributions. Um, and I'm going to just take a moment to ring my bell. You guys join me and let's just push beautiful energy of gratitude towards the sister. May she join the ancestors quickly and without interference. And that is the reading. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I'll see y'all again at another time. Okay. Thank you guys so much. I love y'all deep, like the river.
Nobody talks about you. then you are nobody. Then you are nobody. Remember.